fun. Okay, people are streaming in.
Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Joseph. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for the invite.
We are getting ourselves settled in here. And I've already been, I was asked, is there already a recording? Did you see that one?
I saw that. You're like, only if you can see the future. That's funny.
I thought that was the appropriate answer.
The excitement is so palpable.
That's right.
Okay, well, everyone, welcome to May's Beikai program. This is an evening once every second Tuesday of the month when we get together as a group and we listen to a talk and we talk a little bit about what we are as an organization. I know that last week we had Beikai, we had the SIGKAI occurring, and I don't know if anybody was there. If anybody was at Kai, please send in a text message in the chat anything that you remember from it that was really cool that we want other people to know about. Kai is a very important activity and happens every year about this time. Tonight we're going to be listening to a talk by Joseph Tyler about his work, landscape conversation and design. And the next slide shows that we are an organization that is part of ACM, sort of. And ACM is really the big tent for computer scientists. SIGKAI is the biggest, is the second biggest special interest group after SIGGRAPH. And probably 2,000 to 3,000 people were at the meeting this year. Best scientific work in user human communication interaction. We as an organization put on these talks. We also have other things that we do. We have a job bank. You can put up a statement about what you do as a consultant on our webpage if you'd like. But the most important thing we do is these programs once a month. And we have the Birds of a Feather meetings that happen.
Sorry.
And they happen, for example, there's one about people and their careers in human-computer interaction that Edwin Lee runs every month, third Tuesday of the month, I think.
Fourth, it says here fourth Tuesday.
Fourth, yes. As we move to the next slide, please. We are once a year, we decide who's going to run this place. And at the moment, it's me and Edwin Lee are the chair and co-chair or vice chair or something or other. And we have also a treasurer. And Roberta has been our treasurer for a year or two, and she's stepping down. Now we are using Steve Williams as our treasurer. But anybody that's interested in any part of this organization, please send me email, send anybody email, jump onto the chat. We're happy to get you involved in helping, edit videos, make the videos, set up the website the way it should be, get it onto the phone, even running the organization. So please consider it. And we have nominations. They can come as late as you like, but we do have to vote on them in June. So our next program committee, our next program meeting, we will be voting on the officers for next year. On the first Thursday of the month, we have a meeting that anyone's allowed to come to. It's the meeting where we talk about how we're running Beikai. It starts off with us talking about our work and what we've done in the last month or two. It's kind of interesting meeting just because you get to see what people are up to. We have a lot of volunteer opportunities. As I was saying, here's kind of a potpourri of the ones I was talking about. You can work on all sorts of things. But really, I think the most important thing is first to get on with the show. And with that, I really want to bring up the slide of what this talk is going to be this evening and let Nancy Frischberg introduce our speaker.
Thanks so much, Ted. And I'm going to introduce you to Joseph Tyler. Whoops, very good. Joseph Tyler in just a moment. But I wanted to sort of set the scene here for those of you who hadn't had a chance to read the long form of the abstract. Let me share some of those thoughts with you right now. So in the past several years, like 6 years only, Joseph Tyler, our speaker for this evening, has made the transition from academia to industry with a focus on conversation design. And his career story, I think, illustrates at least 2 points, and I'm sure he's going to tell us several more. But one is how many aspects of a product one person might touch in a startup. We haven't heard about that lately. And also how many different backgrounds can contribute to the team and to the product that you're producing. So conversation design is a new, fast-paced, multifaceted, rapidly growing area in user experience and product types. And related technologies like speech recognition, natural language processing, text-to-speech, and several automatic text-to-speech, automatic speech recognition are continuing to improve, as well as the tools to make all these things happen. And so Joseph gave himself a career break recently, stepped away from the computer, and I hope we're going to hear a little bit about that. I won't read the rest of this, and you can go back to the Bakehi site in perpetuity where we have the long form of this, and we'll also link the video so friends of yours who weren't able to come this evening will be able to see and hear Joseph tomorrow and for the next while. So let me stop sharing my screen and promote Joseph to speaker status. Let me see if I stop like this. Yep, okay, good. And I know in Zoom wants to let me, here we go, call Joseph, there you are. Spotlight you, how about that? Oh, but are you, there you're spotlit.
Still not able to share.
You can't share, so I have to promote you one more time. Just one moment.
Fastest promotions I've ever got.
That's right. Here we go. Let's do this. Where are you? You are here. More. Make co-host. How about that? Make co-host. Now you should be able to share. Does that work?
All right, I can.
Yay.
All right, so can people see the screen with me looking a bit silly?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you for the introduction, Nancy, for inviting me here. I'm excited to meet everyone here. And hopefully this is the beginning of conversations as well. I'm excited to share my story, moving through linguistics into conversation design, taking a career break, and where I'm at now. It's sort of how I see this technology. But I also hope that we can connect either after or at a conference or something and continue exploring. So a personal journey. So this is a little bit like me telling my story. So it's a bit, I guess, personal, but hopefully it has like general relevance to wherever you are coming from as well. The general outline, I'm going to talk a little bit very briefly about my linguistics background and then the shift and why I shifted into tech and found conversation design out here in the Bay Area. I'll spend a fair amount of time talking through one of our key products, so the features of it, my role in it, and how I see them all playing together. Then my choice to take a career break, and I know I'm not the only one. I've had other people, I get to admit new people. This is exciting. I know a lot of other people have considered career breaks during the Great Resignation, during the pandemic, and people have reached out to me about it. It's been interesting sharing experiences there. I also blogged about this experience on my Medium blog, so there's more detail there. And then where things are now. So getting back into exploring what's possible in technology and how I see the landscape. So that's the outline. Unless there are reasons to delay, I will dive in. So, excellent. So I spent about 10 years in linguistics. I did my PhD at Michigan, focusing on prosody and discourse structure. So this is the acoustics of speech, and discourse meaning the structure of things that are more than one sentence large. So this includes conversation, it includes large monologues, but I was really interested in the relationship between these two things. So if you're giving a long talk, is there some predictability to how long you pause in between sentences? Or what kinds of intonation you use at the beginning and ends of sentences? And the short answer is yes, but pinning it down is very hard. So I got into experimental methods and identifying how we encode in our speech acoustics the structure of the discourse, and then how as listeners we decode that information to learn about how the discourse is structured. So I'm giving just a very brief overview. If you want more detail, my Google Scholar page has a number of articles on this and other related things. The most popular one is about uptalk, and I knew it when I wrote that article that uptalk was the thing I was going to be known for, because that's just popular in a way that discourse structure isn't. But I think it also foreshadows me as a conversation designer. So an interest in speech and structure, how they play together and affect my work today. So in addition to the PhD, I spent 2 years at Qatar University in Qatar. Pretty fascinating experience teaching linguistics. I then spent 2 years at Morehead State University in Kentucky, researching how people process prosody, so pitch accents, pauses, things like that, to resolve linguistic ambiguities. So that's the academic background. And then I reached a point where I was like, this isn't working anymore. For a long time, I was just loving it. I just, I get to do this research. I go to conferences. Isn't that fun? I never liked grading, but whatever. It's just part of the experience. And then I was flying from Kentucky to a conference in Edmonton, and my plane got routed to Arizona and got delayed for a long time. And then it took forever to get to Edmonton. And in that process, I was like, why am I doing this? Why am I doing all this academic work? I've lived places I didn't really want to live. So I didn't really say, hey, I really want to live in Qatar. Hey, I really want to live in rural Kentucky. Fine places wasn't my primary goal. So I was making real big trade-offs. And I didn't have this vision that I think some academics might have of being known for one particular area or discovering one particular topic or having a bunch of students that you can mentor. That stuff's fun, but it wasn't like, hey, when I'm 70 or 80, that this is the thing that I will be so proud looking back on. And I really missed people. In Kentucky, I was alone in a lab, beautiful views of the hills, snow coming down and stuff like that. But I spent a lot of time alone, and the projects are long and fairly slow. So given that, I decided to make a career change, worked with a career coach, explored different options, started to interview, and then moved out to the Bay Area for very nerdy. I was like, there are 5 reasons. Job opportunities, good weather, my brother's here with his family, I've lived here for 2 summers. Oh, I'm going to forget the 5th one. But anyway, I did a whole matrix of different locations and benefits of each place, and then eventually settled on the Bay Area. All right, so that's the pre-tech life. Then in tech, I didn't immediately find conversation design. So I had a couple jobs before then, but eventually somebody suggested, hey, go look into conversational AI. And I ran with that term and got super excited about the potential. And so now that I mentor other people moving from linguistics into tech, much like Nancy, I find that using terms that people can go research is really valuable. So I mentioned conversation design or product management, conversational AI, things like that. And I got excited. So I spent 4.5 years at Sensely, which is a health tech startup conversation platform. So we built chatbot and voice experiences where you could talk to an avatar to resolve different types of health concerns. Maybe triage a symptom if you're not sure what to do next, monitor chronic conditions, do educational modules like sleep training, sleep education, things like that. But I am going to talk today about the symptom checker, because that was the flagship product. And so this is my big slide to say, I'm going to walk you through an example. I don't think there's anything quite like an example to make it clear what's going on. And if you've ever tried to go find chatbots in the wild, sometimes they're easy to find, but often they're hidden behind paywalls or authentication. You have to be a member or a user. So I think it's useful to see it in practice. I think some of the things that make this product interesting as a conversation product, if I was in person, I'd probably be like, hey, raise your hand if you work in conversation design or not, just to get a feel. I'm going to try to assume sort of a familiarity with tech, but maybe not too much in conversation design. But I guess let me know, Nancy, if it feels like I'm off base or something like that. So this is a product that is scalable in that we've deployed it in many different places to large populations. It's configurable. So a single product, I should say I, because I led a lot of this stuff, but we as a company, we had a single core product that was configurable in lots of different ways for different regions, for different legal environments, for different requirements on disclaimer language, or if some symptoms had to be handled separately, things like that. So there's a lot of configurability. Multimodal, and I'll show you this in a second, voice and text experiences. It includes intent matching, so the technology used to take whatever somebody says and get them to the right place. A user interface that went through a lot of iterations. It uses backend content, in this case, Mayo Clinic content. So we partnered with them for many years. I got to go to Mayo Clinic's, hospitals in Minnesota a few times and work with them closely. And then multilingual, we deployed it in 7 different languages, and the whole translation process, both for the platform to support something like this and the content. A lot of clinical content and the process of getting that out in front of people. It's quite involved. So I will dive in with a demo. So I'm going to switch screens. And one thing that's interesting is I don't work at Sensely anymore. I took my career break last summer, which I'll talk about a little bit later. They can make changes to these live demos at any time. So I noticed right before this, they had made a change, and I went to this new location. But you can try this anytime you want if you just go to sensely.com and if you just want to see the interface for yourself. Let me see. I like it when I can see some people's faces. There we go. So in the bottom right is this drawer where the experience pops up. And this should look more or less like other chatbots that you've seen, where you have text, you can communicate with it. One of the differences, and I'm going to start with this point, is the multimodality of the interface. So this looks maybe a little more traditional chatbot. There's text. There is a character here, but if you turn on the voice experience, it's all going into my ears right now. So in that sense, I'll need you to trust me, because the way audio in Zoom works, I haven't been able to figure out how to play it through there. But I can say continue. Continue. Let's see. And it can recognize the buttons. So there's a way to use voice input to select buttons. It's confusing because I'm hearing her right now. Continue. So I'll jump ahead. And in addition to these buttons, there are different types of input states. So if I start talking, now it's being routed through a speech recognition service. It could be Google or Nuance or Microsoft or any of the different providers. And then the text gets entered here. And so that's the speech to text component of this type of interface. I am going to minimize so that I can actually have a little more control and show you what happens here. So far, I just wanted to show you the interface. It's pretty unique in that it's an avatar-based interaction. If anyone wants to talk about why Avatar, I can talk about some of the research I've done, the research done at like USC and other institutions. But now let's just assume that the speech is recognized and converted to text well. What do we do with it? And so as a conversation designer for Sensely, this was a huge part of my responsibility, building these flows. So the text up here, the different button options, but also the logic to handle whatever a user might say. So let's just do something that won't be handled, blah, blah, blah. This is the no match state. And then you can go down that fail path and try to deal with it another way. In this case, we go to a fallback menu where you can select, the symptoms and categories directly. But you can also go back. So this is demonstrating part of the interface, the ability to go back. You may not see in every chatbot. A lot of debate about that. I think one reason is just people might mistype or want to change something, being able to go back. It's easy. Okay, so blah, blah, blah. That's one thing. Another thing I could say is it hurts to pee. And at this point, it's putting this through the natural language processing layer to figure out what are the relevant words here and how do I act on those to go to the right place. So one of the right places could be urinary problems. And in this case, that's a good fit. So that's what we would call a match. And then if we say, yes, I'll launch, I'll basically start calling Mayo Clinic and their triage algorithm and ask questions back and forth. So far it's been entirely my design, figuring out, what questions to ask the user and how to get them to say what their problem is. Then we figure out which algorithm for Mayo Clinic to use and go start that. But I actually want to show you a couple other things first. So because people can say anything at this point, and there's a lot of information, there's also a challenge associated with that. One thing I did was look at tens of thousands of entries of what people actually say here. And this is some of the most fun thing, and probably for lots of people, but as a linguist, I love it. It's linguistic data. So when do people just go off the rails? What kinds of things do they ask for that you didn't expect? And you learn so much about your population. So some things they ask for that we should handle, but don't. And so one that I found quickly was sunburn. We didn't have an algorithm ready for sunburn. But because I could see that people were asking about it, we found another way to answer that question. So recognize that as a new, different path. And instead of starting an algorithm, because we don't have it, let's link to content. So you could learn about sunburn. Fortunately, it doesn't work anymore, but it would launch a self-care page about sunburn. All right. But let's choose one, and I'll actually show you the experience inside of the symptom checker. So let's say I'm coughing. So again, it's going through doing the intent matching. So figuring out what you meant to say and how we can handle it. And this matched to a cough algorithm. But the relevant thing is that this is a COVID-19 symptom. And this was a real important thing 2 years ago as the pandemic was starting, and customers were like, oh my God, everything's changing. We need to recognize COVID-19 symptoms. We can't just pretend like it doesn't exist. So there are different ways of handling it, and we quickly iterated on a few of them. Have a dedicated product, give lots of disclaimers. But one of the more robust that stuck around is recognize which symptoms are potentially COVID-19 related. So when I showed you urinary problems, that's not a COVID-19 symptom. You can just go straight to triaging that on its own. But if I say cough, we need to make sure first that it's not COVID-19. As time went on, people were given the option to skip it because there's a dedicated COVID-19 screening module that we built. Brief aside, the first 2 weeks when COVID was hitting in March 2020, I worked like 16 straight days, like 10-hour days, because we were like racing to talk to all the clinical partners and like get these things built. And, it was exciting. It felt good since I was stuck at home anyway, but kind of wild. Okay, so we have this COVID-19 screener. You can go through that and it will tell you what you should do given your answers. But for our purposes, let's skip that and look at coughing as an algorithm. So far you'll see pregnant, the users that when they register an account, you get age, gender, and other information. And if it's relevant to the algorithm, then questions are conditioned by that. So in this case, the user is female and within an age range. I will say no to advance. And now we're answering the basic questions. And this is the clinical logic. So as a conversation designer, I can give my conversation design expertise to how to phrase these questions. And in fact, I rewrote a lot of these questions because when they're written as a clinician for clinicians to ask, it may not read as well for this type of interface. So often that meant trying to slim down the content of the text or make it a little more, well, easier to read, and also work in a voice experience. Let's say no. So there were some button inputs. We've had different types of inputs, open free text inputs, button inputs. This is a multi-select. And I want to take a second to focus on this because I think it gets at this question of what does a conversation designer do? Just to show the functionality, if you click none of the above, it deselects. All of these things had to be specified because they're custom experiences within the platform, taking the Mayo Clinic content and rendering it in this interface. But I'm going to switch over to talk about how we got to this look and feel and my role as a conversation designer, but somebody really doing product work. So if we go ahead one, loading, okay. So this was a redesign of what the multi-select experience was. And this interface that you're seeing today has gone through all kinds of redesigns over the years, but this was one specific one that I led. And going from the experience on the left to the experience on the right. And the text is different, but I'm hoping that doesn't distract us from the core idea. What you'll notice on the left is, yes, there's this text at the top, which is the question text, corresponding to the same thing here. But you also have this please select all that apply as a generic instruction. And what we found is that was often redundant. So here in the question text, please select all, and then it says again, please select all. What that meant is that, well, it's not a good user experience if you're told to do the same thing twice. And it meant that as a designer, I didn't have control. I was subjected to the multi-select state and whatever it, the requirements were. So I wanted to get rid of that. I wanted to get rid of the lines in between. I thought it just added unnecessary ink on the page, and moving the circles from the right to the left. So part of this work is visual and experience led, but also a lot of product management in that I wrote up all of the tickets in Jira for the work to be done, specifying the current state and the desired state, specifying if there's any change in how the scripts. Let somebody else in. So I think Nancy did. Let's see, making sure that these adjustments still fit with Mayo Clinic requirements, adding flags if any of these answers for legal reasons need to be hidden, and I can talk about when that has happened. So wanted to pop out and talk about how the interface, if we think of what conversation designers do, some people may not call this conversation design, but I think a conversation designer is very well disposed to answer these kinds of questions because I know what text is going to show up here. I know where this is in the overall experience and how the look and feel could really matter. Okay, so I will continue on a little bit more. These triage questionnaires can be long, they can be short. I'm going to make this one short. Basically, if it's an emergency, you just stop and say, call 911, call emergency. although that's a whole, you've deployed around the world in different languages. Calling 911 is not a universal, so that's a whole set of work unto itself, localization. But so this is an emergency. I'm unable to speak or make normal sounds. At this point, Mayo Clinic has said, I don't need any more information. I know what the outcome is that you need. I want to call out this state because it took a long time to get to this. And it may seem obvious now that we're here, but thank you. I've prepared a report for you and then some disclaimers. For probably 2 or 3 years, you would go immediately from your last answer to a results page with all of that information. There's no transition in between. It took a lot of work to redesign our API integration with Mayo Clinic so that I could insert a message in between, passing around the variables, things like that. And I want to highlight that again because I'm a conversation designer, but this is also product work in that it's how the integration is done with the API. It's how the syntax is specified to call the different states. And all of that, I think, is important for conversation designers to also do. Okay, so there's this inserted state. Then you can see your results page. In this case, it's fairly straightforward because it's a simple message, call your local emergency number and the reasons why. These results pages can be much longer depending on how the triage goes. And there are actually, I think Sutter Health locally in the Bay Area has a symptom checker kind of like this. So I'm curious if anyone else has used similar tools, but so you could have multiple different outcomes. You could have a lot more information about what to do before, seeing your doctor or whatever the outcome is. I want to step aside one more time to look at how this page was redesigned as another example of product work. And that's here. So the initial design of this results page is what's on the left, and the redesign is what's on the right. And hopefully the one on the right looks better. That was the goal. So one thing you might notice is the stuff on the left doesn't all fit on screen. And one concern we had is when you get multiple outcomes, things are below the fold very quickly. So in the redesign, this example doesn't show it super well, but you can have multiple topics on screen at once, and they get folded down, and you can click them to open, and they'll both expand and contract. The look and feel also is brought in line more with the brand identity, so colors, fonts, things like that. Another thing was removing bullets. So one thing we learned is that space is at a premium, and it's a very different product when you have full control versus when your customer embeds your product inside their own mobile app, for example. So when customers embedded it, they would put text at the top and the bottom, and sometimes it would be constrained even on the left and right. And so something like bullets here may not seem like a big deal, but once you get all that cramped space, we wanted to maximize the use of space. Same with this X at the top. When it's embedded inside somebody else's mobile app, there's X's for their own apps. It just becomes a mess. So there are a lot of different things that went into the redesign, look and feel improvements, but also functionality. So I will, before diving into the impact, talk about a couple other things that make this product special. And so the configurability is a big thing. The dialogue management, I think a lot of conversation products out there, let's see, I wonder if it's good to stop sharing briefly while I talk. I'll just mention a couple of these things and then we'll get back to this impact. So dialogue management, I think one thing that, this is a complicated conversation product. There's a welcome, there's a symptom identification, matching, triage to COVID, or to other sort of out of domain topics, like if you say hello. There's the full integration with Mayo Clinic, there's the outcomes. And then I didn't even get into what happens after the outcomes, but this is where you integrate with the doctor's office, help them call 911 and so on. So it's a complicated product in a world where often chatbots are fairly simple. And this is something I've discovered since, like a lot of the time they are more about sales conversion or connecting you to an FAQ or something like that. So I think it's interesting in part because of the complexity. It is multilingual, and there's a whole set of challenges that came with that. I didn't demonstrate that today, but between platform support, rendering Arabic in a right to left, supporting speech in all of these different languages, and more. Yeah, it's a complicated product, but it's fun to work on for years. So the impact was, this was the company's flagship product. It was behind a lot of the deals. It's deployed around the world, and it was a competitive advantage to have the flexibility that the platform supported for delivering Mayo Clinic content this way. And we had business cases talking about how it was reducing costs to the system. So fun project to work on. I think takeaways, and this, I hope this talk is interesting for, you know, the content of the product itself. You get to learn about Sensely and my work there, but also things that I learned while working on this. 2 points I want to highlight is this balance between configurability and simplicity. And I saw it on both sides. So, you know, there's a trade-off. If you add more and more configurability, you get more power as a designer, but you make things messier and harder to maintain. If you make it too simple, you don't have the flexibility to do what you need to do. So short story to demonstrate both with the Mayo Clinic product. In the beginning, the results page was automatically launched without giving me the chance to close down the session, say something, and then launch the results page. So that was a bit of configurability that we needed to add in later, and was important. A different version of this is, as a conversation designer, I had to have 5 different types of Mayo Clinic states in the script to do what I just showed you, because they were just different types of questions. None of that was necessary for the conversation script. They could have all been rolled into one called Make Mayo Clinic Work. Unless I needed the configurability for some reason, that was just cluttering the conversation scripts that were running this. And it made things much more challenging going to more languages, as well as just debugging, keeping quality high, because there's just more things that can go wrong. So that's one, balancing configurability with simplicity. Another is designing your content tables for scalability. And this is referring to the content that we managed for the Mayo Clinic product. So there's tens of thousands of rows of content to deliver that product. Now imagine that in translation and custom thing work for different customers, although we tried to avoid that. But that's a lot of content. And how you structure that table can make a big difference on whether you're set up to support growth. And I don't need to get into all of the details, but the initial design, I should have talked to an engineer because I sketched it out the way I was thinking, but that didn't necessarily mean that the table could expand forever. And some of it is apparently SQL tables have restrictions on length and things like that. And so as we added more languages, it was like, okay, we need to totally redo this. So talking to engineers, that gets to one of my big points in this talk towards the end, is this cross-functional conversation to make sure your products are good. Okay, I'll take a deep breath. And Nancy, how are things going? Should I slow down or speed up or?
I think you're doing good. We don't have any active questions, but I'm hoping everybody is taking notes and thinking of what they want to ask in a little bit. So go for it.
Excellent. Okay, so that was Sensely. Last summer, I took a career break. And so, I mean, probably the first question is why? And I think there's 2 main answers. One, I felt a bit burnt out. I think it's a pretty simple thing. The pandemic's hard. I was just like, I just need a break. I think the second was, I was wondering what my next growth thing would be. I wanted to get a little perspective on this technology. I knew this one company super, super well, but I didn't necessarily know what people were doing around the industry. And I wanted to get a little bit of perspective on that. So those were two of the reasons. What did I do? This is where it's like Joseph just gets to talk about Joseph, but hopefully it's fun for you. So in the beginning, I focused on personal stuff. And I guess if you're thinking about this kind of thing, taking a career break, there's 1,000 different ways to do it. And lots of people have blogged about their experiences. I made a very conscious effort to do nothing professional for an indefinite period of time. I resisted the allure of going to events, of working on projects or doing some consulting, or I call it alluring because at least I knew who I was if I was doing that work. It was like a way to structure my time, and it was gratifying to have that grounding. Instead, I forced myself to not know what the heck I was doing with myself, and figure out what else I cared about. So things I did, this picture here is just me out on a walk. I went for a lot of walks. I tried to get to know my neighborhood and local spaces much more. I got really into lawn bowling, which is, to me, it's a hilarious and fun activity. The Oakland Lawn Bowling Club is fun. I read a couple books. I read a lot of books, but a couple that I think really fit this moment. So How to Do Nothing and How We Show Up. So How to Do Nothing was just appealing on the surface because I was like, wait a second, that's kind of what I'm doing. And it, in some ways, gave me permission to not be productive. I think that's one of the big challenges is like, I'm so used to being productive. What happens if I don't have that? And this book helped me think it through a little bit. And How We Show Up is in many ways about community and finding connections. And it helped me rethink how I'm connecting to the people in my life, how to reach out, how to depend and ask for help, and hope other people ask me for help. So 2 good books. And then I took a 3-month course, basically right when I left my job. She calls it masterful relating. If anyone's heard of T Group before, it's a T Group experience, which Stanford has a course at the business school called Touchy Feely. I forget what it's actually called, but they call it the Touchy Feely course. Nancy seems to know. And it's very popular. And this is sort of grounded in a similar methodology, although the person who runs this has elaborated. It's kind of like group mindfulness. It's not meditation. It's about sitting together and saying what you're experiencing in this social context in the moment. And so it was very powerful for me to have as a social activity, since I no longer had work. It was kind of an emotional workout. So at the end of every session, I'd be like, ooh, that was a lot. But it was a really great way to just engage with a different side of myself. So very happy that I got to do that. So then eventually, after about 3 months, I was like, okay. I want to get back in. I don't necessarily want a job right away, but I want to go exploring. And I had put that on hold, but I was excited to go read articles and talk to people and so on. So I built up some excitement on that front. So I'm reintroducing myself to professional activities. Did a lot of networking, which I like to think of just as meeting cool people, and different types of networking events. So Voice Lunch is one that I've quite enjoyed. It's easy to join and meet other folks, hear what they're working on, pretty casual. I hosted one myself. I wrote some more for my blog, and this includes chatbot reviews. So live chatbots out there in the world. I just wanted to review them and talk about what I thought. General tips on conversation design, and also just talking about my life, not working, things like that. Eventually, I got interested in doing some consulting. So one outgrowth of networking was that I met people and we got excited about similar topics. And I got an opportunity to consult with Open Dialogue. So Open Dialogue is a conversation design platform. I think most of the team is in Europe. But real interesting, they're taking a distinctive approach to how to do this kind of work. And I got excited about the product. And then as we were talking, they talked about a research project they thought I might be good doing. And if you go to patterns.opendialogue.ai. I can share it later, or ping me on LinkedIn or whatever, I can share it. But it's a pattern library for conversation. So the idea being that there are patterns in how we structure our conversations, and not just templates for a particular tool, but like, how do we do welcomes? How do we do transfers? How do we do information collection? Things like that. Culling it or taking it from academic work, blogs, product demos, things like that, and trying to assemble something that people can use. Real fun project. And I thought for a little bit that I might go full-time consulting. And so I formed an LLC and explored it a bit. I had a few different things in the hopper, and then decided I still might do more consulting. That's sort of one thing that's open, but I pulled back on it. And I think one big reason, like before when I moved from academia into tech, I was excited about working with people. I missed people. And consulting, at least in this consulting role with Open Dialogue, wonderful people, but they were far away and I didn't get a ton of time with them. And I think the idea of having a place to go, an office, colleagues, was very appealing. So I'm still exploring some consulting opportunities, but also really like the idea of a team that I can be part of. And then I'm working on a book with Christopher Stewart and Anne Time-Gobble on linguists considering jobs in tech. And I think all three of us have talked to a lot of linguists entertaining shifting out of academia into tech. Nancy knows all about this. And we have a lot of the same conversations again and again, and thought that it would be useful to have a resource you could give them to learn a lot, and then start having direct conversations. So that's been fun to work on, and I'm continuing to work with them. And then interviewing. So now, man, interviewing is one of the most productive ways of learning how things actually work. It's also one of the most stressful, but I learned things that I could never learn just by like saying hi to somebody. Once they are entertaining paying you, or like what they really need, it's fascinating. So I can talk about where I'm at in that process as well, but also I want to use that as insight into just how I see conversation design, conversation technology. So let's discuss that. And this was the title that Nancy gave to this whole event, The Landscape of Conversation Design. So hopefully you don't feel like that was too much background, but now you know who I am. And here are some thoughts that I have on how conversation design looks right now. And I want to give plenty of caveats. This is my experience. I don't claim to know everything. There are probably totally different ways of looking at things, and I'm ready to hear other people's takes on this stuff. But I think it's useful to say what I've noticed. So I think as I've been looking, interviewing, talking to people, exploring, going to networking events and things like that, I feel like I've seen 4 big categories. And there are lots of ways you could divide up the different people hiring conversation designers, working on conversation products. But this felt like a useful ontology, categorization to me. And the labels may not be the ones you want, but hopefully it's still just a useful rubric. So big tech, basically the big tech companies that we probably all know, and Google, Meta, Facebook, Oculus, Amazon, Salesforce are all working a lot on conversation technology. A lot happening there. There's a lot of startups in this space. Open Dialogue and Sensely are 2 that I've worked with. There's a lot more, and I've met people and talked to people at a lot of these. There's just so many, but it's fun to explore each company's unique take on this stuff. So product-focused startups, consulting and professional services. So Deloitte is maybe a bigger example, and this would just be a small part of Deloitte overall, but they have quite a few people there working on conversation design type things. And then a number of different agencies that help with professional services. And some people have gone solo. So 2 people I adore, Micah Gruenewegen, I don't know Dutch, alas, but Rebecca Evanhoe, and me briefly had tried some solo consulting work in this space. And then a 4th category I've been exploring a bit more recently are companies where their product is not primarily conversation technology, but they've seen value in chatbots, voice bots, things like that, and so are investing in it. And these are a lot of big companies that you've probably heard of, like Walmart, Expedia, Home Depot, banks. So their primary business isn't this stuff, but they see value in it. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that. I didn't expect to gravitate towards some of these companies, but lately I've been exploring this space a little bit more. I'm interested in all of them, but yeah. So I'll focus a little bit on this category. I can say briefly also why I've been gravitating towards it a bit. I think one reason, a big reason, is that they have their own users. It's not that the other categories couldn't have their own users, but I think it's very appealing to me to think about the full end-to-end experience, where if I'm designing a conversation, we know something about those users and we have data that we can go look at how they're using the product and use that to learn how to design better products and iterate on the product. So that's one appealing factor in this kind of company. So one thing I've noticed talking to a number of companies like this and people about companies like this is that often they have shown the initial value of a bot, but then there's this question of what next. And usually what is next is scaling that. So say you've found one use case, it's a customer support bot for this one part of the company, and it has met a lot of people's needs efficiently and people seem happy. Okay, what now? Well, scaling it, the way you built that one use case may not scale well. So you may want to expand to lots of use cases. You may want to add a lot more content. So if it's a support bot, you want to add all of your FAQs, or adding your FAQs that's a longer discussion about what it means to create support content within a chatbot experience. But adding more content, growing your team. So can the team grow smoothly from whatever built that one narrow thing? So hiring the right people. One thing that's also become clear is that educating other people within the company and outside the company on how the value of bots, how to build them, training them potentially on how to build them themselves so they don't have to come to you and have these blockers is pretty important. And then more languages. It seems like that's a natural outgrowth. If it's working in one language, let's add more, get more of the population served. Well, every once in a while I'll see there's comments, but I will probably just wait till the end. Okay, so I'm going to shift to this topic of silos. So I think scaling can lead to silos. And let me be upfront that I'm kind of venturing in areas I have intuitions about. I don't necessarily know 100% for sure on all this stuff. So I'm putting out sort of a statement on what I'm thinking about. But I think scaling can lead to silos, and silos are a problem for conversation technology. So one problem would be if a conversation designer can't look at data on their use of their own designs. So if I build a chatbot and people are saying, like in the symptom checker, what's wrong with them, and I can't look at the data on what they're actually saying, how can I make it better? And this could be difficult to see. You can't see the data because something like Alexa doesn't even give you the data. I think so. It could also be because it's just hard to get to. Maybe you need to go through a data scientist. Maybe you need special skills or permissions, or, with health data, sometimes we just weren't allowed to see it. But it makes it really hard to improve your work if you can't get access to the data. What about the product roadmap? So if the product roadmap is decided without the people using the features on the roadmap, then how do we know that those things are actually lining up? And that's one thing I had a really good experience with my main product manager colleague at Sensely, is we co-built the roadmap. And so he would turn to me on features where the conversation design components were especially important, and I would design those. And we'd work on it together too. So I think where this shows up with big companies, or just any size company that incorporates conversation design, is where do you put conversation design? Is it on the product team? Sometimes. Is it on content design? Sometimes. Is it somewhere else? Is there a dedicated user experience, a research team? Could be lots of different places. I think where you put it makes a big difference. And I think in general, siloing can lead to bad conversation products. So I could brainstorm more examples of how that could happen. But I think the general point is siloing is a problem. I think it's especially a problem for conversation products because they depend on this horizontal integration. I'm going a bit out on a limb. I've heard this from a colleague who might even be on the call about conversations products being especially horizontally integrated. And by horizontally integrated, I mean, for them to work, you need to work closely across all of these divisions. So you need product and conversation design and data to all be very much like aligned. You can't just throw things over the wall in general and for them to work. So that's my sense. Most of my time in tech has been in conversation products. So I don't know exactly what I'm comparing to here, but I think it's important. And I think one thing I've discovered talking to people and interviewing for potential roles is that conversation design as a label means different things to different people. And so I'm contrasting here narrowly defined versus broadly defined. I think in its narrow sense, conversation design means building the flows, so the tree structure or whatever structure for the conversation you step through, and then the words, so whatever the bot says. That's sort of a narrow, like, okay, if you do that, that's the core of conversation design. I think a broad definition is more what I was showing you on today's presentation. So thinking about the user interface, thinking about how the API integrations work and how the syntax is used to call them, thinking about the scalability of those interfaces, thinking about the data and how to make sure that data feeds back into design decisions. I think we need broadly defined conversation design to make good products. I think the more that you can get that, the better the quality. How, that's a whole nother question. So I have thoughts, I'm exploring it. I think that's something I'm very interested in myself. But I think there are definite benefits to having this broadly defined conversation design that covers lots of domains. And I think that was my experience at Sensely. Having my hands in lots of different spaces, I think made the product better. So just some more examples on ways silos can be a problem with conversation design work. If you can't see the data, how will it get better? How will you get better? So the design itself, but also you as a worker. I think data scientists make assumptions about conversation structure, or they can, without really understanding the details. And that can affect the quality of dashboards or whatever the data is used to do. And this could be, for example, misunderstanding the label for what that part of the conversation actually is. So if the label doesn't correspond to what you think it does, then everything else downstream of that is not interpretable in the right way. Other things could be like timestamps, assuming that timestamps are accurate. If the conversation designer looks at the timestamps of the different states and realizes, well, what I designed would go in this order and the timestamps are out of order, then you can't trust the timestamps. So you have to use a different way. Product managers may not always, if they're not also conversation designers, or at least well-versed in the conversations, might not realize the consequences of their choices. So they could choose a particular syntax for how a state would be launched or an API would be called, and not realize that that syntax is in conflict with some other part of the platform. They may design things that don't scale. So they may not look ahead to see how you would want to reuse this tool for another use case. And I don't want to pick on anyone specifically. It's more that if you are too narrowly focused on one part of your, of the responsibilities for this kind of product, you can miss things. I think test criteria. So product managers, at least, if you're writing JIRA tickets to get engineers to request that engineers do the hard work of building things that you need. You want the test criteria to be accurate. And I think if conversation designers are the ones using the things that are being built, you would want designers to make the tests reflect how they will be used. So the closer you can get your acceptance criteria to fit how they will be used, the better. Okay, so that was some like diving in deeper on why silos are a problem. This comes back to what I'm seeing out there in the marketplace. I think there's a lot of hiring for narrowly defined conversation design. And I don't want to say that this is necessarily a problem. I think there are ways to make it work, but I think it's also, there's a risk to it. And I think often conversation design is brought into the process late. So I have met companies who have dozens of engineers, multiple product managers, maybe data scientists, machine learning engineers. They work on a conversation product and they may not have any conversation designers. There's nothing inherently wrong necessarily, but I think there's a real opportunity to have a conversation designer come in and talk about, are those the things we really need to build? Is this the best way to build it? How does this fit into the overall experience? And how does it fit with conversational experiences, what we know about them more generally? It can be painful to come in later in the process and see that, say, product and engineering have already made a lot of decisions and they're not really interested in the feedback that a conversation designer could give. At least this is speaking from the perspective of the conversation designer. Maybe this is not a new thing for people to feel like, you know, they want their opinions listened to. I think I have seen companies hiring what I expect are expensive roles for data scientists, NLP, machine learning, deep learning, and so on, for conversation products. And it's hard for me not to wonder if they should have a conversation designer in the strategy team to decide, well, what are the tools we actually need? Are these the best tools? And do these people have the domain expertise needed to know these users get this problem solved? And same for product managers. You know, they may be good product managers, but if they're new to conversational AI or conversation design, they may struggle to do things like prioritize which tickets to work on and how long they might take. They may promise things that aren't actually good experiences for a conversation product, even though it could work for a different type of product. So all reasons to say that we need to all talk to each other, and ideally people should be well-versed in each other's work, and then turn to each other a lot as well. So this is a picture of me earlier today trying to capture, it's sort of a silly picture, but like my dream is this sweet spot between conversation design, product, and data. So I see this, well, there's probably a cool phrase for this, but basically there's this beautiful feedback loop where you can design a thing, then you can see how it's working, and then you can use understanding how it's working to refine the product and the design. And these things just keep iterating. And I think if you're too far apart from each other, then you lose that benefit. So I think I had the benefit of having my hands in all of these pots to some degree, and it was really powerful. It was valuable. And I think I want to see more really great conversational experiences out there. And I think one thing I want to work on myself, ideally, I would love to work in this interface of these three, but I would love generally conversation products to be developed with tons of overlap between these three. And that is my soapbox and the last slide.
All right. Thank you so much. We have a couple of questions, and of course I have questions too, but let me go to some of them that have appeared in the chat. And yes, thank you, Joseph Liu, for the applause, as well as Carl Anderson.
Thank you for listening. Yay. Thank you for making it to the end. I hope it was entertaining, insightful.
Cool. So how do you, one of the questions that's asked is, let's talk about the Sensely team. How many people were on your team? What were the different roles people had? Because, you know, you've already told us, and I'm going to underscore this, how many different hats you were wearing. And I appreciate very much hearing that, because I think that shows that conversation design is a breed of UX design, right? And and yes, of course, we all want to be brought in as early as possible. We hear that a lot. And it's interesting because you've noticed and drawn our attention to how much of conversation design is content and how much is interface stuff, like where do you put the dots, and should there be lines separating the choices, or is that clutter, and so on. So that the sense of not just, and you think of conversation design as audio, right? But here it's text or audio,
Both. Yeah.
and these visual elements as well. So you can't just be focused on the audio parts, right? So
Yep.
go ahead, tell us about the team at Sensely and who you got to work with there.
Yeah, beautiful team. Companies, I'm still on good terms with these people. It's a great company. So we had a primary product manager. I led conversation design. I should say my first year at Sensely, if you don't know Kathy Pearl, she is just a gem of a human. She's at Google now. She's, been working on the Google Assistant for quite a while. She was there for a year, and then she left to go to Google, and I took over for the next 3.5 years. So briefly, we had 2 people, and then it was back to me. And then towards the end of my time, I hired someone onto my team to cover certain parts of the product, and then I ended up leaving, and he has taken over. So product manager, conversation designer. The team is fairly small, so it was like between 25 and 35 people total across different offices in the UK, Eastern Europe, and San Francisco, and then a few spotted around. A lot of the development team was in Eastern Europe. We had some in the headquarters in SF. It changed a little bit as the product focus changed. So initially the company focused on chronic care monitoring. So this is people, especially with congestive heart failure. That was kind of the flagship product initially. And it's a great use case. It's a hard business case. And Symptom Checker is also a great use case, but the scale is easier because anyone can use the Symptom Checker. If you have congestive heart failure products, it's limited to just a smaller population. So yeah, pretty small team. I'd say primarily I worked with our product manager. I also brought in our ops person for a lot of QA and testing. I outsourced a lot of work to translation agencies, so internal and external resources. I would find contractors regularly to work on like Arabic review if I don't know Arabic super well, so I bring them in. And I did have people help me on the team, for chunks of time here and there before I could hire someone full time.
Cool. Okay. I hope that answers the question from the person who asked it. And Patrick, if it didn't, you'll jump in again and tell us. And Ted asked a great question, which is, how do you evaluate a designed conversation?
Yeah. Oh boy, that's a big question. Sounds like an easy question. I think, the product manager in me wants to go back to like the purpose of it in the beginning. So like, why are we even building this product? What are the users we're trying to serve, and what are the metrics we're trying to move, things like that. So that's sort of a hedge though. I think in general, there are some key metrics to measure. Completion rate would be one. If people are using this product, are they dropping off? Where are they dropping off? So where in the funnel are they going? Another really big one is match rate. So for states or parts of the conversation where users can say anything, are we recognizing what they're saying and recognizing it accurately? So some of this can be automated. A lot of it had to be manual, and I spent a fair amount of time manually going through and annotating. Okay, here's everything a user said. Here's the ones that matched something that we can handle, and then here's the ones that accurately matched. And so then you look at each of these categories and you're like, okay, well, they shouldn't have matched, but they did. Why? Oh, they did match, and they should have. Great. Oh, they said something completely random. Well, we're not expecting to handle that, but maybe we can do some more gracefully. So match rate is big. Funnel is big. I think meta stuff like satisfaction scores, we would often ask at the end of the conversation, did this meet your needs? Things like that, NPS. I think every part of the conversation can have its own deep dive. It's a messier answer when you start looking at time, how long people spend in the experience, because it could be better to go fast. It could also be better to go slow, depending on really understanding what they're doing. But maybe I'll leave it at the 2 big ones are match rate and funnel drop off.
Okay, that's an interesting one because that doesn't account for, I don't know how you collect those data. It's not like one-on-one testing, right? With
Yes. So I am thinking about this entirely after deployment. And so I definitely did some usability testing as well, bringing people in, getting qualitative feedback and things like that. I spent most of my time thinking about the data in the database though. And so tracking this, session ID, and then how far does it go through the experience, and watching the drop off, and, okay, well, this many people got matched to a symptom, this many people completed it if they did match a symptom, and so on.
Cool. Okay. So Patrick asked a different question, which was, how do you think conversation designers, or what do you think conversation designers need to know today? So what kind of skills, what platforms should they be familiar with? And are linguists, I'm going to add to that, is somebody with linguistics training better positioned or equally well positioned as somebody with, say, computer science training? Just to take two random examples.
So people come into conversation design from lots of places. Linguistics is a big one, but also English, screenwriting, moving from UX, things like that. I think wherever you come from, you will bring that expertise. So, when I talk to a conversation designer with screenwriting background, they pay attention to different things. When I talk to a linguist, we often think more similarly. So I think ways that linguists are good is we tend to be very good at abstraction. So using ways of representing things you can't see, syntax, syntactic trees, discourse representations, optimality theory tableaus, things like that. Like, we take data and represent it abstractly. And I think that's what conversation design is. So that facility is a good thing. I think also variability, like linguists are very aware of how variable language is, how different users are from one another. And when you're trying to design for a whole population, being able to foresee that kind of thing is really powerful. And, awareness of the impact of specific words. People write whole dissertations on the word "oh," oh, or "and." And so the idea that you're choosing, should this be two sentences or one sentence with an "and" in between, those choices make a difference. And that's part of what I feel like these data, the researcher in me wants to use these projects to find out. So I think the first question was, what should a conversation designer know or have as part of their toolkit? And I guess I don't want to make the wrong assumptions, but it sort of depends on how much experience you have in the space. So if we assume you're fairly new to the space, I think which platform you learn is less relevant than learning the basics. So some of the voice flow is pretty easy to get up and running with. Landbot, Cognigy isn't bad. Those are the ones I've tried out in my own time. Sensely is great, although it's not a public platform. Dialogflow is a really common one. People use it for different types of reasons. I think basically just start doing things might be my suggestion. Go do trial. I mean, maybe VoiceFlow would be the easiest place to get started. Go use it, get a trial in VoiceFlow, build a tree, with branching, and see what it looks like. Listen to it and say, does this sound good or not? There are other great resources. I don't know how far to go on how to get into conversation design types of things, but Kathy's book is great. Diana Dybel and Rebecca Evanhoe have a book, Conversations with Things. That's a really great introduction. There's tons of online resources. My blog, I do some reviews. I think it's a useful way to see at least how I think while I see chatbots. And I think today's talk, I also showed okay, what is the interface? How does the content sequence? How does the NLU, well, learning all the terms is part of it, but how does the intent matching work and so on. So I'll stop there.
Good. And I just want to draw people's attention. Carl is mentioning a couple of SF Bay ACM chapter events, which also we're talking about conversational AI. And,
oh yeah, live person.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
So it sounds like they've recorded that session and another one not too long ago about neural content, meaningful and truthful. And that's an interesting one. I think I actually listened to that one afterwards. And I know that at least one person in the audience who's still here and I have talked about doing another conversation design session about naturalness and what counts as naturalness and what do we mean by that in
Oh
a
boy.
in a
Yeah.
bot, right?
Yeah.
So, Mary,
I
you're
feel
still
like-
on the hook.
Yeah. I was going to say it might be Mary. Yeah.
I haven't
Yeah.
forgotten. We will do that.
Great
I
question.
feel like a big shift has been away from thinking bots should be human-like to saying bots should be effective. I don't know if everyone feels this way, but at least my thinking has shifted in that direction.
You used to be on the human side and now you're on the effective side?
I think I heard people talking about it. I don't know that I had given it a ton of thought, but there's this general premise that we should study how humans talk and then use that to make bots talk the same way because we know so much about how humans talk to each other. And I think that goes a certain distance, but eventually bots don't need to be human to be good. So I have shifted to focusing more on just how to make good experiences, good products than necessarily human-like.
Got it. Okay. I do want to open up if anybody who hasn't put a question into the chat or anywhere else you could find to get my attention, or Joseph's, that you will feel free to raise your hand or look at, there's Seth right there. Seth, I'm going to say, yes, you should be able to talk.
Okay. Thanks, Joseph. Interesting talk. You made a big point about how it was important for you to put that interstitial between before the API that called out to, what was it?
Mayo Clinic.
Thank you, Mayo Clinic. But then the example was this person had breathing difficulty and the report was go to the emergency room as soon as possible. What is the value of that interstitial? Why did you think that was important and worth fighting for?
Yeah, I guess for the emergency use case, it may not be as transparently useful. In some ways, I had to do it because the customers required a legal disclaimer before they see the outcome. I think with an emergency use case, you can skip a lot of things because you just want people to get help immediately. I think it's more transparent for things like a doctor's appointment because you can condition the message to frame or show empathy, hey, okay, we've gotten to an outcome. You can frame like how to interpret what they're about to see. I think you can also create like a soft landing because sometimes people would be sort of jolted out of, you're going question by question and then all of a sudden you see this results page and you're surprised. So I think there's sort of a smoothness to being able to insert a message that would transition that user over. I agree that it is a little bit weird on an emergency outcome to add in something before they're told, call 911 right away. Actually, I think some of the ones we did, that interstitial was call 911 right away for more details, click this and then it'll still say call 911. So this might be partly because it's a demo on the website. Does that help?
Absolutely. Thanks.
So Ted added another question, which is very relevant, namely, what did you learn in your academic research that is applicable to the work you're taking up now?
Yeah, good point. So I think a lot of the work I did is focused on speech, and the way these products use speech is usually out of the box TTS, out of the box text to speech, which means I would like to refine and nuance how the like how the intonation goes a little bit higher if the context is a particular one. And that's a level of detail that I just didn't have control over in this context. But I had ideas on what I would do. I think another one would be, let me think. Ambiguity, that's a big one. So I studied ambiguities a lot in my research because if something can mean two different things, then you can test what moves interpretation towards one or the other. So I became pretty aware. Honestly, I was aware in 7th grade. I was that annoying kid who would tell the teacher, like, hey, that question could be interpreted 3 ways. Like, which did you mean? And they're like, but you want to avoid that in conversation design. So if you can imagine some portion of your user base misinterpreting the question or interpreting it a different way than the way you intended, then you can try to rewrite it to be as clear as possible. So I think linguistic ambiguity is a big one. I mean, maybe a little more directly is I studied discourse representation, and not that my findings directly modified these theories, but there's a number of different theories for how to take a large discourse, like a large conversation or speech or something like that, break it up into its parts, show how all those parts relate and how that builds a larger structure. So that's a kind of abstraction. And I think it informs how I think conversation design modeling could work. One example is like zooming. I wrote a blog post about this. I think being able to see it at broad and narrow is really important. And I think that was part of how I thought about my own work within linguistics is you see the full scope of the discourse, and you also look at specific parts. Some initial thoughts. There's a lot more that I didn't do that linguistics, I think, can say. There's like meanings of different types of intonation that are super interesting. I think there's a lot of perceptual dialectology, which, put that in the chat. It's a super fun, and I wrote one, dialectology. Basically, oh, that's only one person. Thank you, Zoom chat. Basically, what do people think of different dialects, different features of those different dialects? What do you think of the people who speak them? And I think the same thing comes back when you choose a TTS voice. You know, what are the perceptions? So Apple comes out with a couple of new TTS voices, and people, you know, perceive them certain ways. Well, how does that affect the business? So I've studied how people, you know, how to elicit these perceptions, both of things like uptalk as well as the different dialects of Arabic. And I think that process shows how much variability there can be, and then how you can go into making decisions as you build these experiences.
Cool. Thank you. And Jeff Perron asks, are you familiar with Wobot? And what do you think of it?
Heck yeah. Super interesting.
I don't know. Tell me what Wobot is. I haven't heard about it.
So Wobot is the product. It's the result of Stanford professors' research, as far as I know, cognitive behavioral therapy implemented in a mobile app. And Wobot, W-O-E-B-O-T, is sort of a fun pun. But it tries to implement this CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, into a bot experience. I've played with it very briefly. I've never used it at length for myself, so I can't say what the experience feels like personally. But it seems like a great use case, and I've heard good things. So it seems like the research backing is there. The interface seems, you know, fun, good tone. So I'm pretty intrigued with it, even if I don't have a lot of personal, you know, experience on that front.
So Jeffrey, do you want to say
yeah.
more about it? You could come off mute. Or not.
I think.
Did you just ask me if I wanted to talk about it?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I was talking to them about working for them, although it did not work out. But they're, you know, it seems like a great thing, and that there seems like a lot of potential to do, you know, scale therapy. So that was why I was kind of intrigued with.
Yeah, I've
doing.
seen
They seems like one of their biggest issues. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to
Seems like one of their biggest issues is how to get people to come back to it. So they're kind of trying to make it entertaining and, you know, kind of gamify it a little bit, I think. You know, in the proposed dialogue that I sent to them, I kind of did a pretty much a straight up sort of thing. And I don't think they like that, because they're still, you know, at one point, for instance, they have a video of sort of dancing chickens in one of the interactions. So I didn't quite go to the dancing chickens place, but it's an interesting question.
I mean, the question of like bringing people back is a huge one. This one, I spent a lot of time thinking about it, Sensely, and it's hard. I mean, I think it's probably hard for any app, but yeah, with conversational experiences and engagement, that's a hard one. Yeah, I mean, I think eventually you have to add value. I think gamification is one part of it. Duolingo, I keep coming back to. I feel like they've done the gamification well. But yeah, bringing people back. I mean, one way I like to think about it is program design, not just conversation design. And so in the Dybel and Evanhoe book, I think they call it multi-session design, but being able to think, okay, you're doing this one conversation, but I already have a whole sequence mapped out. And then the engagement could be through push notifications of various types. Some of it's use case driven. So if there's a strong motivation, that's actually where the avatar comes back too. So we had pretty good evidence that adherence would be better with an avatar. So I think the richness of the conversational experience leads to better engagement, adherence, returning. Partly you've built a relationship, and I think the social obligations we feel to people we know are stronger than to forms. And I imagine an avatar is just a stronger version than a chatbot. I imagine there's some sort of scale of like Google form, chatbot, rich avatar robot experience or something like that. Speculation.
And all the way at the far side, human.
Imagine.
Talking to a human. Oh my goodness, right.
Hey, Jeff.
So Amy has this question, and I want to just acknowledge that we're getting right up to 9 o'clock. And if you have to go, we understand. Joseph, you're available to stay a couple more minutes to see if we can answer a few more questions. I'm up for that too. Amy's asking, how important is it for you to develop domain expertise in this health bot situation? And did you have domain experts to work with, consult with?
Yes. I did not come in as a health expert. We had a chief medical officer on staff. I worked closely with clinicians at Mayo Clinic, as well as some of our customers who would have their own clinical staff. So I learned a lot on the job. I would bring linguistic expertise, conversation technology expertise, and I would defer to others on domain expertise like that. That said, I gained a lot of domain expertise, like the kinds of things clinicians are concerned about, where to like back off because I don't get it. Like okay. Yeah, and at this point, I probably am like more aware of the kinds of things that would come up, but I would never claim to be a clinician. And I think that distinction is very important. Honestly, building rapport with clinicians on the side of customers was hugely important. They could quickly like stop things, and knowing how to defer to them and address their concerns. And clinicians, I learned, often think differently from technologists. So figure out how to bridge those two.
Yeah. Jeff has a hand raised. Go for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so one other thing, recently I ran across some chatbots that were embedded in New York Times articles online done by Smart Politics. One of them is called Angry Uncle, and it's basically to kind of coach you how to talk to conservatives to convince them to become more progressive. And another one by the same group was to encourage people to get vaccinated. Have you run across any things like that, anyone?
I'm going to look it up right now. So I've never heard of bots for specific articles. Bots on websites are everywhere. And I can talk about, I didn't include it in this presentation, but like some of the most common use cases and places I've seen bots. But I love the idea of, a way of adding more engagement. It seems like a lot of work to do it for a single article. But the persuasion side, I guess so maybe one thing I see between these two is this education and training side of things. And we had some bots like that at Sensely, where you would create an experience where someone could learn how to do their job better by interacting with the bot. You could practice and so on. So I can imagine something like practicing how to have a conversation with a angry uncle would be a variant on that. Raises the question of scalability though, again. It's like, how could you have a bot that you could quickly adapt to every article in the New York Times? That'd be kind of fascinating.
These were very simple, very small bots, but it did add an interactive component to these articles, which were opinion pieces in the Times.
Mm-hmm. Cool, no, I'm stoked to check it out. It's been part of the fun of having my blog. I'll just like go find cool things and write about it.
Yeah, cool. Well, I was just looking to see if I had more questions here, and I think we've covered most of my stuff. Anybody else from the audience want to join in and ask Joseph a hard question?
Yeah, bring the real hard ones, the ones that
Yeah.
you were wondering if you should bring up. Oh, dear. I'll drop my my LinkedIn in the chat just in case anyone wants to.
Thank you. And it's also linked from the Bakehi calendar entry. It links to your LinkedIn also. Carl, speak up, please.
So is there something equivalent to a spell checker in the sense of a conversation checker, something that analyzes to make sure like information is being transferred correctly or whatever goals you're trying to achieve for that?
Yes, although I would probably want to ask follow-up questions on what you're exactly getting at. I'll say something similar and you can tell me if this is sort of what you're thinking. So quality assurance testing for conversation experiences exist. And I think often you'll have a step through flow and then you can let it run in the background and it would flag if the system went down. So for example, we needed to know if Mayo Clinic's API went down. And so we would have test algorithms running, saying, cough, yes, continue, or whatever else, and just to make sure that all of the things are working appropriately. It's kind of like spell checker for conversation. Basically, do a walkthrough and make sure it does what it's expecting.
Well, that's more runtime as opposed to a pre-check. I'm talking about beforehand to know that you're covering everything you need to do in the conversation, perhaps, or I guess there's self whatever individual tests, unit tests that you would still do too.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you would need to do good requirements gathering to know what the bot is required to cover, and then you could use that as a way of, maybe unit testing to make sure it actually covers it. So I don't know if this is still what you're getting at, but for example, we knew what symptoms we could handle with the Mayo Clinic algorithms, and we would want to test that all of those were successfully being handled. And then that goes beyond just saying, can you launch it, but can you launch it with a variety of ways that people might say it? So I think you can get more and more complex in terms of the scope of coverage. Make sure you can launch them all, make sure that you can launch them all with 10 different ways of saying each one. Make sure the different ways you navigate the tree all work. I don't know if that's still getting at what you're asking about or not.
Partly, it was a vague question, so.
Okay, well, we can continue at another time. Let's see a couple chats. Bespoken. I feel like I've heard it, but I don't know it. No, I've never used it. Worth checking out. Spoken.
And then, so Jeff, he doesn't know Bespoken, but the question that Joseph is posing back to you is it worth it, right? But then I'd like you to, should we check it out? How about Mary's question about her friend says the MVP approach doesn't work for conversational interfaces, particularly voice. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I made an offhand comment a couple of years ago where I was like, MVPs in conversation design are mostly not, and they're not reaching the M. So yeah, I think part of it is that if something goes wrong in a conversational experience, people are less forgiving. It just feels wrong. I think also we tend to launch things before they're really well tested because we want to iterate and learn. And then maybe you never get to the point of them actually getting better. So I do think you at some point have to launch something. So you have to figure out, so maybe the problem to me is less what is the minimally viable product. Like there has to be something that's minimally launchable, but the threshold needs to be a lot higher, and maybe even higher for voice. One thing that surprises me about voice is how many times I'll see cool, like super fancy avatars or, fascinating interfaces, and then the voice is just terrible. It's like it's such an afterthought.
Mm.
I don't know. I think it's because people are cobbling together, things from different parts to make this full experience, and they may be focused on one other thing.
So Mary, do you have
I
a
can
comment back? I was going to ask, oh, Jeff, you're going to have a comment back?
Yeah, I was going to say about Bespoken. I have not used their tools, but I've been following what they've been doing and kind of attended a few with their webinars and whatnot. So basically, they started out by creating tools for testing voice systems. So they would send it, pre-synthesized speech, and basically tell you if it was responding correctly and kind of monitor uptime and all those things. But then they branched out to, now they're doing IVR systems, interactive voice response systems. And it seems like they have some pretty interesting stuff. That's what, automated testing tools, and can actually, based on what kinds of responses the system gets, they can make suggestions for altering it. And so it seems pretty useful.
I'm looking at it now.
Or actually,
I might ping you to see if I'm looking at the same one you're thinking.
yeah, they're based in Peru, actually, but they do a lot of work.
There's so many companies, and it's interesting to see how much of them overlap versus have some, it looks like they focus on financial services sector. I don't know if that's the same one, but like, how do these all coexist? Is it the region they're in and they're specialists in Peru? Is it they're specialists in a particular language? Is it the platform is super easy to use? Is it the tools that are like integrations are easy? So, I mean, I played with Cognigy, VoiceFlow, Landbot. Colang was super fun. I tried out Rasa. Rasa's harder for me. I would love, and it sounds like you're doing some of the same stuff, which is like trying out these different platforms. Oh, Voxable, Open Dialogue. Like what assumptions go into them and what are you able to do with those different tools? And then, how do companies choose which tools to, I'm just, these are all questions floating around.
Very focused on testing, and their icon is a graphic of a llama, so it's fairly distinctive. If it doesn't have a llama, it's not.
No, it's not them. Yeah, I've heard of. I think Qbox is built around testing, like out of the box testing for conversational applications. I think Gong.ai, similar.
So I want
swap things.
I know that Mary has unmuted, or she did for a while anyway.
Hey, Mary.
Do you want to say something about that MVP problem? Everybody knows MVP is minimal viable product. Minimally viable product. Yeah.
Well, I forget who asked the question before I brought that up. They were asking about a way to test coverage, basically, and it made me think about that notion of MVP. And definitely, one of our mutual friends definitely has said that. Can I put this on?
Hey, it's Mary.
Hi. One of our friends had said that, had brought that up, that, MVP is ridiculous for voice interfaces and for conversational interfaces. And it made me think about how a lot of times, it seems like you do need to have more functionality in place for a voice product to really succeed. I don't know. There seems to be a lot of truth to that, right?
I have a new thought.
But back to what you said. I agreed with what you said, but I actually asked that question kind of building off of the question that came before mine, because in a way, I would just say, to me, it was kind of like, you just kind of want to avoid being really, truly minimal because you probably don't have enough coverage in that sense. Or it could be a question of coverage or a question of performance. It may not be performing well enough for the general public in order to get a positive feedback loop going.
Yep.
Anyhow,
Yeah.
I think an additional reason is that it's easy to launch something that looks like a bot and hard to launch a good bot. So like, like you can launch the interface and then it just does everything terribly. And you feel like you've got a minimally viable product because you can ask the question, how can I help you? Even if you can't really do anything, or you can do one thing. So I feel like the gap between what is launchable, like from a visual perspective, is lower than a web page. I guess I'm comparing the web pages. But the requirements for it to be a good experience for at least a high proportion of the user base is probably maybe higher. I don't know how to compare exactly, but I feel like there's a gap there where you're like, oh, it's good enough to, like, it will look like it is a bot, but it doesn't actually work. And we get caught in that trap. That's why we think it's an MVP when it maybe really isn't. Does that make sense? I might have to think it through how to say it cleaner.
Right, right. No, it launches, it performs, right? You can step through something, and it just, as far as the end user who's not involved in the development of it, it doesn't seem like it's doing anything, right? So
that can happen, yeah.
And I can understand why that would not be a minimally viable product.
I mean, one of my big peeves is when people introduce the bot as if it can do anything, but it can only do small subsets. So like, how can I help you? And then there's like 3 things it can do.
Oh, I don't know anything about that. Oh, I don't know anything about that. Right.
Yeah.
And they don't even know to say, I don't know anything about that either.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Repeats. Or have a fallback of some sort. Or, I don't know. All kinds of things, but.
Try again next week. Okay.
I went to a talk a couple of days ago where the CEO of a chatbot company was like, there's a lot of terrible chatbots out there. And I was like, this is wild. Like, you know, yeah. Anyway, I won't go down that path too far.
All right. Well, I think we have exhausted the audience for the moment. And I am delighted that you were able to come and share your experiences with us and give us some hints about why it's useful also to take a break from time to time and refresh yourself and clarify on your goals. So that was refreshing to me also.
Thank you,
and
Nancy.
Thank you for showing up, and thank you all in the audience for showing up, and tell your friends that it's going to be available on YouTube in perpetuity, and we'll probably do some stuff to clean it up after a couple weeks, put on an opener and closer and get rid of my mumbling with the slides at the beginning, right? Okay, I'll say good night for May. Think about who wants to be an officer, or if you know somebody who wants to join Bake High as an organizer with us, that would be great, because officers and new year is coming, new officers, and especially a treasurer. And next month, I cannot remember who the speaker is, but Ted's in charge, and that's who's asking a bunch of great questions tonight. And so that'll be up pretty soon. And we'll see you the second Tuesday in June. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. And thank you, especially Joseph Tyler.
Bye.
Bye.